to episode 61 of Conversations with I Follow the Leader, Banishing Burnout in Organizations and High Achievers with Julian Reeve. I am so excited to have you here today. If you are watching live, and even if you're watching later, please let us know in the comments where you are tuning in from. You are in for a treat today. This episode is really for leaders seeking to create a thriving work environment without succumbing to burnout. And it's also for organizations who want to transform their approach to stress and maximize employee retention. Hopefully, that is everyone. So, welcome. We have a treat. I want to bring on Julian Reeve. Julian, thank you so much for being here today.
It's absolutely my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
And I want to read you all a little bit about Julian. However, first, I think it's important to share our context and how we got to know each other. We were both speaking at a national HR conference in California, and I was on one day and Julian was on the next. And so I actually had the pleasure to be able to hear Julian's keynote. And I will drop this picture in the show notes, but there's actually a picture of me taking a picture. I actually think I'm doing even a short little video because I was really enjoying Julian's keynote and story. And so that's fun to have that captured of me just enjoying hearing you speak. So you all are in for a treat. To tell you a little more about Julian, his journey went from a successful musician and entrepreneur known for his work on the groundbreaking Broadway musical Hamilton to a passionate advocate for combating burnout. And Julian's going to tell us more today about his stress induced heart attack that happened at 43 years old and how that's really led him to where he is today. And I love this word, he is disrupting society's approach to work and stress. So, Julian, welcome. So happy to have you. If you could just tell us a little more to start with about perfect equilibrium, and then we're going to just dig deep into your heart attack and why you're doing what you're doing today.
Yeah, great. Yeah, Perfect Equilibrium ostensibly is a company that focuses on achieving success in healthier ways. I've come a long way in my understanding through my research and my reading in the last 6 years that high achievers have a very specific outlook and mindset when it comes to achievement, partly because it's very often associated with their identity. And that kind of needs optimizing, I think, in order to stay away from stress, stay away from burnout. It's not only an individual responsibility, it is an organizational one too. And in my experience, perfect equilibrium is found when we combine the two. So we have individual burnout responsibilities, then we have organizational responsibilities. And when the two combine successfully, that's when we find perfect equilibrium.
I love that. And as a high achiever, I think this topic is just really important and critical, especially in today's day and age as we have technology and many people are working from home and you find yourself working more hours than in the past. And so I think this topic is just really critical. And we're unfortunately seeing, right, more strokes, more heart attacks,
Yeah.
more stress induced symptoms and unfortunately health outcomes due to some of these things. So I really would love for you to share so that everyone listening is on the same page. What is the difference between stress and burnout?
Yeah, well, so burnout officially, so the World Health Organization calls burnout a syndrome that results from chronic workplace stress that hasn't been managed properly. So, as that intimates, stress and burnout are two different things. Burnout isn't anything to do with financial concerns, anything to do with family worries, for example. It's chronic workplace stress that has not been managed properly. Now, how I kind of encourage people to kind of think about it and connect with it, associate it with quickly, is I think about stress like this. It's like it's too much. It's there's too much to do. There's not enough time to do it. I'm stressed. Burnout is almost like this. In fact, it is like this. It's like I have nothing left. I'm completely drained. I'm emotionally exhausted. I'm detached from reality in many ways. And so the two feel fundamentally different. And I think that and that are actually two kind of good visual aids that can help you kind of differentiate the two.
I think that's so important, right? To understand that chronic stress can lead to burnout. And so
Absolutely.
sometimes, yeah, we feel like, okay, I'm stressed, but it's gonna get better. But there has to be some type of intervention. And just want to pull up one of our comments. Appreciate the explicit note that community care and self-care are interlinked. Too often, there's an overemphasis on individuals somehow surviving by themselves and an underemphasis on the need for community
I
care and
love that.
connection.
I
That
love
is,
that.
thank you.
And that right there, that statement right there is why I do what I do, right? Because
Yep.
organizations, the easy way for organizations to figure burnout or to get employees engaged with burnout to the point that they stop burning out is to throw money at the problem. And historically, what's been happening is that many organizations think that, well, if I provide some form of wellness program, if I give them gym access, if I help them be more resilient by giving them all these tools, then I'm fixing burnout. And it's just not true, right? There is only so much individuals can do. And it's important that individuals do that work and that organizations empower them to be able to do so. But there's a lot that the organization needs to do specifically to help the employee.
I love it. And even when we talked in preparing for today, you really wanted to focus on that, the individual and the organization, even
Right.
in the title. And so I love that this watcher was like, wait, this is so important. And someone else is even saying, thank you for identifying the difference between stress and burnout. So many think their staff is stressed when it's much more serious. So thank you for those who are watching live. Thank you for engaging. It really helps us in our conversation. And so
Yeah.
that's what we're going to go into now. We're going to talk about what are some of the tools that individuals and then organizations can do. So, Julian, can you share why do you think high achievers are often those that struggle with burnout the most? And is there a solution?
Yeah. Well, yes, I strongly believe there is. And it starts with this. It starts with mindset. And actually, I can kind of tie my backstory into how I kind of arrived at that thinking. So I used to be the music director for the Broadway show Hamilton. I worked on the Broadway production for like 6 months and then took the first national tour out and we opened in San Francisco. Long story short, I just finished conducting a show and I was walking up a hill and I started to get really tight chest pains. I started to sweat. I was hyperventilating. I got shooting pains down the left arm. I went to bed thinking, I have no idea what this is. I woke up the following day, went about my business. On the Sunday morning, that was on a Friday night. On the Sunday morning, I checked myself into ER and it was confirmed at that stage by an EKG that I'd had a heart attack. So I went about my business on the Saturday, right? I went to the gym on the Saturday. I conducted another performance of Hamilton on the Saturday, having had a heart attack. Unknown. Why? Because people who are high achievers, people who are in a position of authority, position themselves from a work first perspective. Some of that is because they care about their work and they're very good at it, and they care about their organization, they care about the people that they manage. But some of it is also associated with control, with ego, with perfectionism, with workaholism, all the things that I actually call creative interference. Now, creative interference is one of three responsibilities that I think individuals have to manage burnout. So there are three organizational responsibilities and there are three individual responsibilities. So from an individual standpoint, before we get to creative interference, we have to shift our mindset about our approach to work. because on the Sunday, so just to wrap up the heart attack story, they basically did an EKG, then did an angio, and they then put in 2 stents. And the cardiologist came up afterwards and he said, "I hope you understand how lucky you are." And I said, "Yeah, I know. A heart attack at 43 is crazy." He went, "No, not that bit, this bit." He said, "You had a heart attack on Friday night. You went about your business on Saturday, which is an incredibly stressful situation. You've got to remember, this was Hamilton at the height of its kind of euphoric craziness, in 2017. The pressure was immense." And he said there was every chance that heart would have failed even more. It was hanging, like your right coronary artery was hanging on by a thread. You're so lucky you're here. And this is why I know that individual burnout starts with mindset, because we have to get our heads around how we approach our work. We have to understand mindset leads to perception of stress. There's too much message out there that all stress is bad. That is categorically not true. There is eustress, which is good stress. And guess what? High achievers need good stress in order to do their best work. So that's kind of pillar number 1, is mindset and perception of stress. Pillar number 2 is self-awareness. I had no idea throughout much of my career how stressed I was. I didn't really know what stress was, how stressed I was, what it was doing to my body, all of that stuff, until I got into self-awareness and the power of it and the power of understanding. 3 questions I ask myself all the time. What am I thinking? What am I feeling? What am I sensing? Those 3 questions empower me to know about me at any one given time, which allows me to make a decision based on those answers. So developing self-awareness is super important. And then we get to the creative interference. So my research since the heart attack, I was like, this stuff's fascinating. I've got to figure this out for me, but I'm pretty passionate about figuring this out for other people. And through my research, I recognized that high achievers are affected by 6 main issues: perfectionism, workaholism, imposter syndrome. Nod if you know all of these things, because we get it, right? Anxiety, low self-esteem, and loneliness. Now, incredible people like Stephen Pressfield, who's a brilliant author, will call this something like resistance, right? I actually call it creative interference, because all of those things interfere with our creative process. Perfectionism causes procrastination, causes desk drawers to be completely full of ideas and never released because they're never perfect enough, etc. So we have to get on top of creative interference as well. So those are the 3 pillars. So we've got mindset, perception of stress, self-awareness, and dealing with testing, and then coming up with really good strategy to deal with creative interference.
That is powerful. For anyone who's new to the podcast, I'm always taking notes because, wow, I think I learned just as much as the audience. And this is when people are going to have to listen back to, because you're dropping so much good knowledge, especially, right, the different points I think people can really relate to is, right, if you are a high achiever, some of these different things, and why do we subscribe to them, right? So something I wrote down is just, we're often not taught about stress. And so I think even the questions you're asking yourself around thinking, feeling, and sensing are really key and important, because are you tapping into how you're feeling versus maybe that outside pressure? Someone, we shared this earlier, the good stress and the bad stress. And we have someone who's sharing, right, just a lot of our ideologies and historical ideologies push people, right, to feel these things, and just how negative that can be. And so
Absolutely.
I want to talk about, and I'm putting on the screen, which someone shared earlier, wellness initiatives and programs can be useful, but they can definitely become more of a band-aid to fix chronic burnout. And so we talked some about the personal side and the individual. And so now I want to shift to the organization's role. Can organizations do? What have you seen to be successful around addressing burnout for organizational success and not making it this quick fix or band-aid.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, 3 pillars, and it starts with positive social environment. So effectively culture. And I think one of the biggest challenges I face in my business is that there is a widely perceived idea that fixing culture is a very detailed, lengthy exercise. And as a result, people put their head in the sand and go, well, I haven't got time. I can't afford this. And, it's going to take too long. I'll try something else. And that's where the Band-Aid comes from. That's when people reach for wellness programs. But they don't understand that there are actually very simple ways that you can start to make significant shifts culturally pretty quickly. And it starts with a flag in the sand that says, listen, we are listening to you, our employees. You are valuable to us. We care about you. We want to build our culture in such a way that responds to your needs and who you are as individuals. So many businesses are based on, this is what we do. We have to find people that fit with what we do, right? Flip that thinking on its head. This is the challenge for C-suite, right? Flip that thinking on its head. How can you actually create a culture based around the people that you value? And that starts with understanding your business values. It starts with communicating those values omnipresently in everything that you do, right? So that's pillar number one. Number two, you need effective systems, right? All too often, there is a kind of rough idea about what stress and burnout management is, and there's a rough commitment to that. But you need effective systems. You need a physical system, an observational system, and an educational system. So the physical systems are like, for example, when you are when you're hiring, right? You should have a physical system that makes sure that the job description is congruent with company values. And so you know exactly when you're interviewing that you've made potential employees completely aware of who you are as a business. That's a system, right? That can just be a method that gets kept in a file on a computer, whatever, and brought out at the appropriate time. Observational systems, reward and recognition, for example. If you do the annual retreat, if you have a social calendar, there's a drink on a Friday night every week at 4:30. Use that to observe how people are doing. If people are withdrawn, if they're detached, why? That might be a red flag for burnout. Educational systems. Your employees need to understand what they need to do when they feel certain things, so that if they test for perfectionism, for example, and it's proven that they struggle with, let's say, self-orientated perfectionism, as in they expect perfectionism, or they expect perfection of themselves. What do they do about that? How do they manage that? How can you help them? I love that part of my work for two reasons. Number one, I get to empower middle management to help themselves and others. So I love that. But secondly, I actually created my own kind of educational system, AI based. So I leveraged ChatGPT to come up with Pepper, the perfect equilibrium personal assistant, which is just in your phone. So anytime an employee has an issue, it's like, I'm feeling stressed today because of my perfectionism. What can I do? It's a closed circle AI space, which means that it doesn't just go out and grab random stuff. It only grabs what I want it to grab. So it's congruent with my thinking, but it learns from the behavior of the employee. And what's exciting about that is that we're just getting to the point where we can make that program business specific. So we can, put all of the company values in there. We can put all of the company beliefs and all that stuff, so that everything's congruent in the way that it's delivered. And then lastly, every organization needs a strong support structure. And this again is a lot of the reason why I love my work with middle managers, because all too often, C-suite just look for their middle management to do all of the work. And because it's part of their job, they're not looked after. They're not supported. They're not given enough resource. They're not given enough care and attention to be able to look after themselves while they look after others. And that bit's key. So those are the three things: positive social environment, effective systems, strong support structure.
Thank you. That's all of that's so powerful. And our team does so much culture building work at organizations. And often the one you talked about, the values, right, being first. Often people have a mission or vision or values. However, it's really not ingrained into the organization. And so whether that's equity or that whether that's other values, it often gets lost in translation because it isn't embedded. And so, like you said, that should really start from the hiring process all the way throughout. And often it's not in the hiring process. It's not clear, what do we stand for? What are our values? And so I think that is extremely critical. And then the reward part, often something we see when we do cultural audits is people haven't asked their employees, what type of rewards do you want? Or even like you said, and I love, like, wow, just the AI resource that you have and that you're creating is powerful. On the positive side, what are rewards? And on the other side, when you are stressed, what resources are there? Is there someone for you to go to or someone for you to talk to? And so I think all of those are key. The strengths, knowing employee strengths. So I'll often ask while I'm speaking, I'll just ask the managers in the room, how many people know how each of their employees like to receive feedback? And only a few people will raise their hands. And so everything you're saying is right. It's taking that step back and really getting to know the individual employees and their strengths and their opportunities for growth. And that just creates such a different feedback loop than come do your job, right? We're only going to talk about the job and leave. And I think that's why we're seeing so much turnover, so much burnout, so much stress. You talked earlier about even loneliness, right? The Surgeon General, for the first time, has declared loneliness as an epidemic.
Right.
An epidemic. I mean, that is pretty scary to have loneliness declared as an epidemic. So really appreciate you sharing your insights, the work that you're doing, and would love to know, some of the wins you've seen, like those organizations or individuals who are really willing to pause, take that step back, breathe, focus on the individual and organizational success. What are some of those, things that can happen well if people are willing to take that step?
Yeah, and I think that's arguably the key, if people are willing to take the step. And I think, there's a very specific point in kind of my program. So part of the reason why I market my services in the way that I do, so basically I look at employee retention and I fix burnout within your organization, small businesses in the creative sector, within 90 days. Now, the reason why I've gone for that route isn't because I can't fix everything in 90 days, but what I can do is give you a very solid system and structure that allows you to lay the groundwork, sow the seeds. I do a lot of the water pouring, if we're going to stay with that analogy, myself. And the bit that kind of I always get a great response from is literally in the first day, because I genuinely feel that C-suite are afraid of the size of this problem, right? And the bigger the organization, the greater the fear. But they don't understand or necessarily connect with, and why would they until they see it, the effect that we can have through inclusion in the room. And this is a lot of what I love about speaking. And it's a lot of the reason why I use live polling when I speak, because effectively all I am as a speaker is a facilitator. I'm not the guy that just goes, okay, Here's my backstory. Here's a problem. Here's how you fix it. It's let's use you to come up with the solution. And so a lot of what you brilliantly articulated about the need for bringing employees experiences, their outlooks, what they need, what they want into the experience, that's when I see C-suite's light bulb go ding, because they're in the room. And the way that I do it, because it's super important, people will only put their hand up from an employee perspective talking about stress and burnout if they feel safe, if they trust the environment, and that they know and understand that there won't be any persecution because they are giving solid, accurate data as answers. And so the way I collect data makes it all anonymous. So I never allow for any of these individuals to be identified, which means I get really good stuff in the room that's really juicy, and I can go, wow, okay. Then at the end of the day, we get to the point where there is literally a presentation on that talk, on the findings. I use the same slides to then go, okay, here are your problem areas. Here's how we're going to fix it. That's when they go, this is how you can promise to fix burnout in 90 days, because that just provides the framework, and it just needs a shift in thinking. But that bit really is the bit that I love the most, is when C-suite go, all right, I get it, we're good.
Yes, and I think, it's so important for those watching or listening to know this isn't about your leadership if employees haven't come up to you directly. And so we've seen over the past 7 years that it does require anonymous, right? An anonymous way and an external resource for most employees to feel psychologically safe to share their thoughts and feelings and opinions. And so it's not about leadership, right, being bad or toxic or anything, but most of us, right, when I worked in companies, you're often fearful. Okay, are they tracking my IP? Are they going to know that's me? I
Absolutely.
want to share, but I also, like you said, I don't want the negative repercussions of sharing. And so when you have this external resource, we've seen the same thing. Employees are willing to share, and then leaders actually get the real data, right? The real quantitative and qualitative data where you can then help to create a solution. And so I think that's just really important to state, because I know a lot of leaders feel like, well, why wouldn't they share with me? And so we've seen over the years, people aren't willing to share often. And so just wanted to put that out there. And as we get ready to close, if anyone has any specific questions for Julian, feel free to put them in the chat. And if we can't get to them right now, he can definitely come back and answer later. But I would love to know from you, as we're finishing up. We talk a lot about courage and courage-fueled conversations and courageous leadership. And so would love to know from you, why is courageous leadership necessary when thinking about banishing burnout? And I think we've even seen in your personal story, right, the courage to make changes. So would love for you to share a little more.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I love the term courageous leadership. I think it's brilliant. And I think, certainly from a middle management perspective, but even from senior leaders, I think, there are two responsibilities. There is personal courageous leadership, where we have to, it's a bit like the mindset and the attitude to stress. Our courage has to get us to the point where we accept that stress is a problem, that burnout is a problem, that we give ourselves permission to think differently, to consider this situation differently, and that takes courage. Then, from an organizational standpoint, if you're in middle management, for example, it's having the courage to go to C-suite to say, listen, this is a problem. And how I always encourage middle management to kind of try and engage those conversations or with those leaders is to try and present a solution with the problem. And you're going to arguably be listened to in a better way. And then for leaders, it's the courage to believe that what is the unknown is better, right? Yes, the grass is always greener, but I think, again, and I speak from experience, some CEOs are very fearful of changing anything to do with their bigger picture because up until now, it has worked. And I used inverted commas, right? Because it hasn't worked. You've just been super lucky to this point, and dependent on what your employee retention figures are, etc., there's proof that it's not working. So having the courage to step forward into that space to say, enough, I have to do something better for my employees so that I can keep them, but also they can stay healthy, is super important.
Thank you. So important. And that goes back to the disruption piece that we started with is we are living in a different time. And so as leaders, we really have to take those courageous steps to go, what worked in the past is going to need to shift. It's really going to need to shift. And I love that. I love data. Going back to that data, has it actually worked? So going back to the retention numbers, going back to your EEOC numbers, and I love even in the chat it's saying if it's work for whom specifically. And so going back to that equity piece, often the middle managers or right now Gen Z's in the workplace, often it's affecting those who are new into the workplace or those who aren't in leadership positions. And so important that we really get that full scope of what is everyone going through and how can we help them. So appreciate you. Like I said, you have given so many tips, and also I just love explanations for the individual and the organization. And so I would love for you to just share any parting encouraging words with those who are on that stress track right now, or have gone through burnout in the past, or maybe actually experiencing burnout right now.
Yeah, I mean, if you are experiencing burnout right now, try and remember that, it too shall pass. You're not alone. And I think one of the biggest things that I encourage people who are feeling burned out to do is something that they will naturally need to kick against, which is the natural instinct to stay detached, right? You have to try to do what you can to become emotionally reconnected, right? And whether that's through your best friend, your family, your partner, whatever that looks like, sharing is halving the problem. And having, a burnout buddy, if you like, is super, super important. As for the encouragement, don't wait for a pain point. Don't wait for a heart attack at 43, right? Get in front of it, do what you need to with self-care, with, however your workaholism or your perfectionism is affecting you. Start to figure that out as an individual. And then from an organizational standpoint, it's having the courage to understand that short-term investment is so important for long-term gain, particularly if you're in a specific business that requires certain skill sets, hard and soft, that are arguably hard to come by because there's a shallower pool of talent to pick from. So you have to do the work to make sure that you're keeping them and retaining them.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. And we have a user saying, I like that part about remembering it's a temporary feeling. And so knowing there is a solution, I think is the best encouragement, is that there is a way out. There are things that you can do individually and as an organization. And I love resources. And Julian was so kind to have a resource for those who are listening to this podcast episode. And so I'm going to bring that onto the screen so that you can scan that QR code. Also, for those who are listening and not watching, it will be in the show notes. So go to the show notes to receive this. But Julian, if you can just tell us a little more about what those listening or watching will receive when they, here we go, when they scan this awesome QR code.
Yeah, so this takes you to the Perfect Equilibrium ebook, which is a 38-page document, which kind of elaborates slightly more on what we've been talking about today, and gives you 6 steps to perfect equilibrium: 3 for individuals, and 3 for organizations. And it's just what I've tried to achieve with this is to get people to lean into the fact that it doesn't have to be such a big problem. There are simple ways that you can start, and this document absolutely helps you do that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. It was just amazing to have you on, to be able to meet you and hear your keynote. And so, for those who are really looking for a keynote speaker around burnout, I heard Julian, and he really got the audience engaged. And it's just a topic that unfortunately is not going away. And so I love that you have solutions for not only the individual, but the organization as well. So thank you so much for coming on and for just sharing some of your knowledge and also your vulnerability and sharing just your personal experience as well.
Of course, totally my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Julian. Good to see you.
Yeah, you too. Take care.
Thank you all so much for listening or watching to episode 61, Banishing Burnout in Organizations and High Achievers with Julian Reeve. Be sure to check out the show notes where we will not only link the resource that he shared with us, but also more information, his LinkedIn, his website, and you can go to www.perfectequilibrium.co to learn more. We are so happy you listen, and please share this resource with others in your organization, in your community and friend group who need to learn a little more about burnout, because as Julian shared, we want to get ahead of this before you're experiencing those pain points. So thank you, and we will see you soon.